Hello from BigSpeak. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Amy Eddy, and I've got school going on in the other room and a toddler crying, but I'm here today with certified financial planner, Natalie Taylor. Natalie has run her own private practice. She has worked for a Fortune 50. She left the corporate world, and I think I'm going to ask her about that later, and is now back into private practice. She consults in the fintech space, and she's creating content for some very large brands that we've all heard of, and maybe some of you work for. Of course, Natalie is also a keynote speaker, and fun fact, with one of my clients, she's the only speaker that they've brought back a second time, and even a third time to use again. Natalie's also a longtime childhood friend of mine. We lost touch for about 15 years and then literally ran into each other one Sunday morning not that long ago. So I'm super excited to be here with her. And thank you, Natalie, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Amy.
Really appreciate your time. And I'm going to get right to it with my first question. So I hope you're ready.
Let's dive in. I'm ready.
I asked a client the other day, hey, I'm going to be talking to a behavioral financial advisor. If you could ask a behavioral advisor one question, what would it be? And he said, nothing. I don't trust any of them. So what do you say to that, Natalie? Is this a typical reaction to people in your world?
I'm afraid that it is. Yes, it is a typical reaction. There's so many people in the US that call themselves a financial advisor, financial planner, wealth manager. Some of them are insurance agents, some of them are actual financial planners, some of them are just selling products, some of them make money on commission. There's such a wide variety, and it's so difficult for consumers, for clients to understand, what do you do, who are you looking out for, and what are your motivations, how do you get paid? Most clients don't actually know how their advisors get paid. And there's a lot of, I feel like financial advisors make things really opaque a lot of the times because they believe that that's what builds value. That's why a client would want to work with them. If they can make things seem complex and opaque, then that buys them sort of the ticket to take care of the client. And for me, I take the opposite approach. I would rather my clients really understand things and feel empowered, even if that means that at some point they're ready to go it on their own and not have me anymore. For me, that's a win. I would rather teach people to fish than to add complexity to a situation that doesn't really need it. So there's a lot of complex financial products out there, and I think it's really confusing. So if you're ever looking for a financial planner, I would say look for somebody who's a fiduciary. That means that they have to look out for your best interest. They don't have to just say, oh, sure, it's suitable. I could sell her an annuity and make a $10,000 commission. They have to say, is this the absolute best thing for Amy? And so I would look for somebody who's a fiduciary. I would look for somebody who's a certified financial planner, and ask them questions about how they get paid. And if you don't like the answers, go somewhere else.
And that's an appropriate thing to ask. I think for most of us, we wouldn't even think, is this okay? Are they going to tell me the truth? That's a great idea to just ask.
Totally. It's a completely reasonable question to ask, and any good financial planner or financial advisor is going to be happy to be straightforward with you to let you know how they get paid.
Well, and I feel like you're already kind of answering one of my later questions. I think for a lot of us, it's this big, scary, confusing world, and so we just don't deal with it, right? And then over time, we continue to make some good and some bad financial decisions, and then get ourselves stuck in this space that we never intended to be, but we're just so overwhelmed that we get paralyzed by that and don't know where to start.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's some good decisions, some bad decisions, and oftentimes it's non-decisions. So it's more of, I didn't really know what to do, and so I just didn't do. I didn't do anything because I didn't want to make the wrong choice, and it stressed me out, and I didn't feel equipped to make these kinds of decisions, and I didn't know who to turn to and who I could trust, and so we just didn't. We didn't do the thing.
And then 20 years later, you're regretting it.
Totally. Yeah, I in my first 8 years of practice, I worked with a lot of pre-retired clients. And so I was, 22 and looked about 14 after two kids. After two kids, I really
so rough.
my age now, but when I was, in my 20s, I looked about 14, and I worked with pre-retired clients. And so many of them would say to me I wish I would have met you 20 years ago. I wish I would have met you when we first got married. I wish that we would have talked sooner. And now I work with clients who were in their 30s, mostly with young families who are dual income professionals. And many of them, like one person in the couple is looking to take a step back, maybe temporarily from their career in some way, either go to consulting or make some sort of change to be able to be a little bit more sane and a little bit more present with their kids when they're under 5, especially. And so now I'm getting the opportunity to work with clients when they're younger, instead of them telling me repeatedly, I wish I would have met you 20 years ago.
So it sounds like it's never too early to start, right? But when you're in a phase of life or family life or big career decisions, that sounds like a good time to get a hold of an expert and talk about, and obviously we're going to talk about values more later too, but it sounds like it's never too late to start. But when you've got big things going on in your life, just like every other area of your life, right? To check in and see, how am I doing? And, you know, with you, especially pitching you to my clients, I love to talk about financial health. You know, we're talking a lot these days about our mental health, our emotional health, and, you know, our overall wellness. And our financial health is a big piece of our overall wellness.
Yep, absolutely.
What's a behavioral financial advisor? You talked about being a CFP, but what is a behavioral advisor?
Yeah, so I'm both a CFP and a BFA, a behavioral financial advisor. And behavioral financial advisor, that designation is really geared towards not only just giving high quality fiduciary level financial advice to clients, but also helping them make the behavioral changes in their life to be able to actually execute and move forward, to break old patterns, to relieve stress, to bring into alignment their thoughts, feelings, and actions around money. To be aware of the beliefs that they have around money. And once you bring those sort of from the subconscious to the conscious, to determine whether you want to move forward with that belief or not. You know, I love to think of myself as more of a feeler, but I'm a thinker. And so I take a more tangible approach to all of those things. So it's not really like in the realm of touchy-feely, but I think it really makes a big difference for people, because those are really the keys that unlock your ability to change. You can have all the right information about how to, you know, eat less, exercise more, or whatever those things are. But until you have those keys to unlock behavioral change, it's really not all that useful. So the behavioral financial advisor designation is more geared towards that.
That's so helpful. Thank you for explaining that. And you kind of touched on this, but you were the first financial expert who I ever talked to who would ask, what were finances like in your home when you were growing up? How were the finances dealt with? And I've never heard anyone else talk about that, but just based on what you just said, I mean, no wonder it's so important. We learn habits, and, you know, whether things are good and, you know, we want to copy it, or things are really bad, so we want to do the opposite. But so much of our decisions and our habits are unconscious. So when you're meeting with a private client, you know, what do you ask them, and what kind of information are you looking for? And especially if it's a couple, you know, if both of them have different upbringings, you know, how do you use that to their advantage to move forward in a healthy way?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was just talking to a client yesterday, and they have trouble spending money without guilt. So, you know, a lot of times we think about overspending, but there's a lot of people who struggle with spending money without guilt. And so we talked a lot about, you know, I said, would you mind sharing with me like how money was handled when you were growing up? And what she shared with me was that her family, you know, they owned a giant ranch, they had hundreds of pets, they lived sort of a big life, but she literally didn't have lunch money or a jacket. She would pretend she wasn't hungry. She would pretend she wasn't cold, because she didn't have those things. There was no money for those basic things. Her parents would treat other families, you know, be generous with money, and then there wasn't enough for them. They were, you know, multiple kids. I think there were 3 or 4 of them that lived in the living room of a 1-bedroom apartment on the ranch. And so there was this really like big mismatch between the outward vision of what their financial life was like, and then her experience being in her family. And so in talking through that, it helps to clarify for people, oh, it kind of makes sense why I feel uncomfortable spending, or why I feel guilty about spending, or, you know, why generosity makes me nervous. Like I want to be a generous person, but now I understand why that makes me anxious. So I think that's been really helpful. And in finances, you know, we talk a lot, like when we're meeting our partner and in the courting phase, which was, you know, 5 years, because Ryan took a while to propose, but 17 years later, we're very happy. But you talk about all kinds of stuff. You tell childhood stories, you recite lines from Adam Sandler movies if you're as old as I am, but you don't really talk about like how money was handled and how you handle money because of it. And so I find that just that simple question for a partner to listen to their partner answer is really powerful. And it wasn't until my husband and I sat down and said, okay, I know your family well, but how did you handle money? And how do you think that impacts the way that you handle money? Until we answered that question to one another, we lacked understanding, and we would butt heads about the same financial things over and over and over in cycles. And I find that that's really common for couples, that, man, it feels like we just have the same fight, on repeat every 3 months or whatever. So yeah.
Okay, you have to tell us a story about when you only had one car.
Oh.
Please, if you don't mind.
Yes. Okay. So my husband drove a Pathfinder, and he had 180,000 miles on it. And we had just had our first kiddo. I was pregnant with our second, and he needed a new car. And I was like, your commute is 3.5 miles long. We live in a small town now, and we really don't
with
need
wonderful weather all year long.
With wonderful weather all the time. Like, we really don't need 2 cars. We could just be a 1-car family, and that would be perfectly fine. So why don't you buy a bike? Because it's good for the environment. You can buy like a really awesome bike, just all souped up. I don't know, spend $2,000, just buy a crazy awesome bike. And so we talked about it, and he considered it, and then he bought a convertible, a 2-door convertible. But technically, you can get car seats into the back seat if you have to take the top off and then drop the kids in. But it technically works. He can technically do pick up and drop off.
I just love that story so much. And I'm going to ask you in a little while about spenders and savers and why we need each other. But that's just the epitome of a spender and a saver.
Yes, I am a natural born saver. And my childhood, I was a daughter of a business owner, and I saw the income go up and down. And what I really saw, my dad was a business owner. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And I didn't see the impact on my dad, but I saw the stress on my mom. Because when things were not going well business-wise, she panicked because she felt powerless. She wasn't the one that earned the money, and there was nothing she could do about it. And she was doing most of the spending for the family because she was doing the grocery shopping and all of that kind of stuff, and getting clothes for us and paying for soccer and dance and all that stuff. So my reaction to that was to tend towards saving. And I married my opposite in lots of ways, including that one. So,
and again, we'll talk about more later too. There is good in that too.
Oh, totally.
I think I've heard you on another podcast talk about how when polar opposites are working together, you're both going to get each other to do good things that you wouldn't otherwise do. So, totally. I think you and I kind of grew up in an era where making more money is better, and the less you spend, the better. But we don't want to just save everything good until we retire, right? We want to enjoy the time between now and then, and enjoy young families, or whatever the next several decades are going to be, and not just save up all my lattes until the end.
Totally. I think one of the things that I talk with clients about, and I talk to audiences about, is finding balance between those two things. And I think that's one of the fears that comes up around money, is that the less I'm spending, the better, the more I'm making, the better. And if I try to spend a little more to enjoy life, or make a little less because, maybe that career path that provides me the higher income really isn't the right thing for me or my family, or causes too much stress for me, or doesn't allow me to have the work-life balance that I desire. There's a lot of fear and anxiety around making those decisions. And so a lot of what I work through with people is figuring out what is that balanced picture, and how much do we need to save, and how much can we just spend freely and enjoy? Right. Because, life is long, and we need to save for later, but life is also short. And we need to enjoy life now. So a lot of the work that I do is helping people come to the right balance between those two things.
Mm-hmm. And I'm skipping ahead here, but you do talk about core values, and I think with your keynote speaking as well as with your private clients, it seems like that's where you like to start. What are your core values, and how in the world does that relate to my money? Do you mind telling us what your core values are, and or how you help your clients kind of figure out what theirs are?
Yeah, absolutely. So core values are really They're not limited to the financial realm. They're really the things that at the heart are most important to you. And if you manage your life with a partner, to your partner. There are things like, for my husband and I, family, community, health, generosity, meaningful work, adventure. They're the things that if they're present in our life, we feel content, we feel fulfilled, we feel at peace. And if they're missing, we feel anxious, we feel stressed, we feel out of alignment, we just feel off. And we all have them. It's just a matter of bringing them from the subconscious to the conscious and recognizing what are those things that are most important to me. And it gives you so many tools for making decisions in your life, but among them is to be able to say, well, these are the things that are important to my husband and I, and their values are different. And so they're making different financial decisions or different life decisions or career decisions, and that's awesome for them.
Right.
But what's right for us is to be in alignment with our values. And so values then become a decision-making filter, not only for financial decisions, but for life decisions, for career decisions, for how you spend your time. And they can really inform a lot of the decisions you make. So I think they're really key because it's not uncommon for people to come to a place where they feel stressed or anxious or spread too thin. And the first place we go with that is I need to either do things more efficiently and keep doing what I'm doing, or I need to find a way to cut back, spend less money, spend less time, spend less whatever, spend less effort, or have more money. There's like this, okay, I'm going to solve it with one of these things. But really, if we use our core values at the base of that decision, as the foundation of that decision, that's really what unlocks your ability to make the most effective decisions to put you in a better place than you were before.
Mm-hmm. And so my husband and I sat down and said, okay, we got to do our core values. What are they going to be? And what are Natalie's? And then I said, you know what? Let's just copy hers. We don't need to. So we just wrote down all your core values, and it's been interesting because I think that's why I'm actually where I am right now. We rented out our house for a month or two, we don't know. And we're living in Colorado, just short term, and the kids are doing school here and we're doing work here. But it's, because you talk about adventure, and we kind of realized yeah, that is actually, we want to have experiences, and this actually didn't cost very much money, and it was, stressful to pack, but it was an easy thing to do, to check one of those boxes. That's an important way we want to live our life. And that's been so great just over the last several months, even for me and my husband to talk about, it's not just about having more money or more free time, right? There are several areas just in our psyche that we want to, grow and nurture. And more money doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fill those holes. Right. And my next question is actually, I think for a lot of us, we think, gosh, if I just, get my income to this level, or if I just get that promotion or make this many sales in a year, finances won't be a stress anymore. And tell us why that's not true.
Well, let me give a glimmer of hope that it can be true. But I think there's something about that we all live in this tension of is there enough, there's not enough, this sort of abundance versus scarcity sort of place of which one are we going to live in? And I think, when we're new in our careers, when we're in our early 20s, we know we're going to make more in the future, and things just seem, oh man, it would be so much easier if I went for making, I'm old. So when I graduated college, you were hoping to make 30 grand a year. And you say, oh my gosh, if someday I made $100,000 a year, that just sounds like $1 million. That's going to be amazing, and things are going to be so easy. What you don't really realize is how expensive a mortgage is, and what it means to share money with another partner, and student loan payments, and all of those sort of realities. And I think those layers just sort of continue in every season of okay, now we're in the, I work with people in their 30s with young families. So they're reaching their peak in earning years. They're getting really well into their careers and making a few $100,000s a year in many cases. I don't work with millionaires or multimillionaires, but I work with, families who are making good income, but have a lot of trade-off decisions to make. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just an understanding of knowing which things are most important to you and being willing to make those trade-off decisions. One of the stories that I share is that my husband and I, we really wanted the flexibility to have adventure in our life. We're saving for a year off in 3 years when our kids are old enough to be independent and young enough to still like us. And part of our way of achieving that was to buy a townhome instead of buying a single family home. And our first house, 10 years ago was a single family home. So in some ways it felt like a step backwards, and we just kind of had to get over ourselves and about that and really understand, like, no, this is a decision that's in alignment with our values, because if we can keep our mortgage low, we have all this extra money to like do the things that we really want to do. But it's a matter of like making those trade-off decisions and figuring out what is really important and what isn't, that will get you to the place where you feel like you have extra.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to me like a lot of people will agree, but they won't actually make that decision, right? I mean, I remember when you bought your townhome and I thought, oh my gosh, she's really doing, practicing what she preaches. And I think there's that pressure to keep up with the Joneses, which is just so silly in every way. And yet for emotional reasons, or, because of how money was handled when we were young, whatever it might be, it seems like most of us don't really, have the guts to make that change so that all these areas of your life can be fulfilled. And it's just such a bummer, right? I mean, I'm assuming you see that with some of your clients and even some of your audiences, that people agree with you, but they're going to go home and they're not going to be willing to, take a pay cut so that they can live a more fulfilling life or grow in this other area of their life that's really meaningful to them. And they're just letting it go.
Yeah, it is. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, which is why, for me, in the kind of mission of my work, I really enjoy getting to do one-on-one client work and also get to do work in front of audiences, because when I work with clients one-on-one, we get to walk through all of that together. And it's so rewarding when I see someone get to the point that they do feel comfortable and confident stepping into what's next for them. That is based on their values. And it doesn't always mean earning less. I'm not going around trying to, sorry, there's a lot of noise in the background. I hope you can't hear it, but,
Nope.
But I'm not always going around trying to make people make less money by any means, but helping them look at those financial decisions differently through a lens of their values. It's super rewarding to see when that stuff really starts to click. And it becomes really easy. I quit my job making a great salary in the corporate world and went out on my own, and it was humbling, but it was so in alignment with my values that it just made it very easy. And people would say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you left the career track that you were on. It's like, I can't believe I didn't earlier, because this is what enables me to feel so much better.
Will you tell us the airport story with the kids?
So my husband and I used to travel a ton. And my husband even more than I did. And we would literally pass our babies off at the airport. So my husband would be flying in and I would be flying out, and we would meet each other at the airport and hand the kids off. And one time my flight got delayed. I was pregnant with my second. My first one was like waiting for the handoff, and my flight got delayed, and I was just panicked. I was pregnant and bawling. And these two angels, this guy who turns out to be like a really successful executive here in town in Santa Barbara, he said, my assistant is arranging like a different flight and a black car. Do you want to just come with me and I'll get you home? And so I totally sent my husband the LinkedIn of him to say, like, if I don't come home, this is the guy that took me, but also like I have to get home to get the baby. So I'm going to go with this guy and try to get home. And it all worked out, and he was so lovely. And yes, but yeah, we've had some close calls.
Yeah. Well, and I think, it's crazy to think like we kind of can feel like we're stuck, right? We've got this career, it's going great. It feels great, and we're, things are working really well. But when you stop and again, go back and look at your other core values, I know meaningful work, you said, is one of yours, but having to pass your kids off at the airport, that just sounds really tough to me too. And I know for some people, they're like, get me out of here. I want to be on the road. As a lot of our speakers, are total road warriors, but it's just important to be paying attention, right, to all these areas and seeing, okay, are we out of alignment in just one area just for a season? Or
Right.
are we out of alignment in 4 areas for the last year? And gosh, we're realizing this is really taking a toll. And like you said, it doesn't mean quitting your job. It just means sitting down and looking at where we can readjust so that,
Right.
we can be more fulfilled in everything that we're doing.
Right. It's the
Thank
willingness
you.
to ask yourself, like, is it worth it? And to let that answer be more than financial.
I love that. Vanessa, thank you for your question. And this is leading to my next question. You said this already, but women make up 80% of the spending decisions in the home. But it seems like women aren't as involved with the behind the scenes of the finances. And I'm curious if you think that this is accurate from your perspective, or is it normally just that one person handles the behind the scenes finances and the other one doesn't? And then of course we can talk about the saver and the spender. I'm just curious, like, what are the trends you see, and why is it that this is something that just feels so overwhelming to some of us, so we don't do anything, and then that leads to long-term, maybe not damage, but long-term things that we can't go back and reverse.
Yeah, I mean, I work primarily with elder millennials, so I'm right on the cusp of X and Y. But I work with elder millennials and young Gen Xers. And I think the younger the client, the more likely that the woman in the relationship, if it is a male-female relationship, that the woman is involved more, which is great. I think, my industry is still largely men. 75% of all financial advisors are men. And the vast majority of them are over 55 and white. So there's a lot of older white men telling us what to do with our money. That's what my industry looks like, just demographically. And that doesn't resonate or connect with a lot of women. And so I think for me, that's one of the important things about the work that I do, is that women can make excellent financial decisions. And I have found to be very savvy with money. And they're also more willing to ask questions when we engage, which I really appreciate. Women are more willing to be humble and say, can you explain more about that? I want to understand it more deeply, which is huge, because they'll end up understanding things much more because they're willing to learn, to acknowledge that they need to learn. Not that they need to learn more than men, but that they're willing to put themselves out there and say, I didn't quite understand that. Can you explain it again? Whereas men are less likely to do that. In my first 8 years, when I worked with a lot of pre-retired clients, I would have men ask to do a call with me after a meeting with their wife, because they wanted to ask me more about what we were talking about. Like, they wanted me to explain stuff, but they didn't want to look dumb in front of their wives, which is really interesting. So, I'm finding women are more and more involved, and I think that's a really important thing. I'm also finding that a lot of the stereotypes that we have about men and women with money just aren't true. Women aren't the spenders, and men aren't the savers. Women can be incredibly savvy with money. So I'm enjoying seeing more of that diversity in the women that I serve.
Love that. So we've been tinkering with this a lot, but I feel like spending is spending. Speaking of spending, it's a lot like eating and exercise. Like, there's so much emotion involved. We spend for emotional reasons, not just because, we're out of peanut butter. And I guess you touched on this already, but why do you think it is such an emotional thing for a lot of us?
Yeah, I mean, I think with eating and with spending, that there are thoughts, beliefs, and feelings behind those actions that are in the subconscious that we aren't really conscious of. And so we spend or eat to satisfy some of those thoughts, feelings, or beliefs. And so it shows in our actions. And then we want to change our actions, but we can't unless we look at, okay, well, what are the underlying beliefs that led me to that action? Or what are the underlying thoughts or feelings that I was going through? Do I spend when I'm upset, or do I spend when I'm celebrating? And why do I do that? And are there other ways that I could honor celebration in a way that's healthier for me, either physically or financially?
Are you sure you're just not a therapist?
I'm sure. I'm a financial planner. I know all about 401ks and all that stuff, but
look at the letters after your name. You might be actually a therapist and not know it.
Yeah.
So interesting how, humans are so simple and yet we're so complex, right? And
totally.
how we live and work and communicate, you know, it like shows up in different areas in ways that we don't even notice, right?
Totally.
Someone's asking about divorce, so I want to hit on that. And also, like, I wrote down, isn't it depressing when you see two working adults who have made relatively good decisions and we still can't have everything that we want when we want it? And I think especially if a family is splitting, you know, that is a big complicated piece to your finances, right? So what do you say about that?
Yeah. Isn't it depressing when people make a good income and have made relatively good decisions and are still sort of feeling like there isn't enough to go around?
Yeah.
I think first is just knowing that like you're not alone in that that's very common. And that when you look around and compare yourself to others, you know, I've had the interesting pleasure to be able to see inside of probably 1,000 people's finances over my career. And the outside is often very different than the inside. And so I think just knowing that you're not the only one that struggles with that. And I think acknowledging like, you know, what are the boulders that we've put into our financial life that is causing this constraint, this constrained feeling? And are those, do we want to stick with them or not? So just like the house thing, you know, for Ryan and I, we made a conscious decision that like, we didn't want a giant boulder of a huge mortgage in our budget because we wanted to have enough money to like do a bunch of other stuff. And so we chose to have a smaller boulder and that made a big difference. And there were trade-offs. But I think really examining, like we tend to make those big boulder decisions like buying a house without really thinking about, okay, I can technically afford the down payment and my budget can handle the mortgage, but like, what does this home purchase decision mean for the rest of my finances? For my ability to like go to Maui when I want to go to Maui and to be able to like save for college and save for retirement and eat out and not feel weird about it. And so I think it's that understanding the interconnectedness of the decisions that can sort of help somebody out of that place.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then let's have you tell us the Boulder, Pebble, water exercise. And I think this probably would relate well to a family that is splitting up and going from one home to two. So tell us about that exercise.
Yeah, so one thing I'll say about when a family is splitting up and going from one home to two, a lot of times the woman in the relationship, if it's a male-female relationship, will take the home and then have this giant boulder in her budget and also have, in many cases, primary custody of the kiddos. And the man will take the other assets that are more liquid and have more flexibility from a cash flow standpoint. So I think there's a lot, there's CFPs that specialize in divorce planning, and they really have a specialized skill set to help people going through those situations. And I think it's a really good time to engage with somebody. I don't have the divorce certification. I think it's a CDFA, if I remember the right way, Certified Divorce Financial Advisor. But I think that would be really important to do during that season. In terms of the boulders, water, pebble analogy, so I talk a lot about budgeting, not because, you know, my general demographics of who I serve are, you know, struggling in terms of like they're not making a decent or good amount of income, but budgeting is something that's on the table for almost every one of my clients, whether they make $200,000 a year or $800,000 a year. Like budgeting is a thing. And it doesn't mean tracking every penny, but it does impact our lives on a daily basis. That's how we engage with money on a daily basis, is through our spending. So it's a topic that we cover, that I cover with pretty much every audience and every client. And so one of the ways I talk about it is if it's feeling like there isn't enough to go around, like you were describing, then what I would do is I would take your expenses and figure out, do I have a boulders problem, a pebbles problem, or a water problem? So if you think of a stream, and we're trying to get water from the top of the stream to the bottom, the big boulders in the stream are going to make it very difficult for the water to flow. In addition, if you have a bunch of pebbles in the stream, if it's just like completely overwhelmed with pebbles, it's going to be very difficult to get water from the top of the stream to the bottom of the stream. Or if you just don't have enough water coming in, it's going to be very difficult to get water to the bottom of the stream. So the way this relates to budgeting is the boulders are those big expenses, like childcare, mortgage, other debt payments, those kind of big rent, those big pieces that are in your budget. The pebbles are all the littler stuff. They're like the tail end of Hulu and Spotify and Netflix and the gym and all that stuff that happens that are smaller expenses. And then the water is your income. So I think when we feel like there's not enough, we think, oh, well, we just need more water in our stream. Or we need to like eliminate every boulder and pebble. But really, there's probably one area that would really give you the most impact, where you have the most leverage. And so doing an exercise to figure out, do we really have a boulders problem, a pebbles problem, or a water problem, is really effective because it allows you to focus where you have the most leverage. So in order to do that, I would say list your expenses from biggest to smallest on a monthly basis. So probably things like mortgage, childcare, sometimes student loan payments are way up there. And then smallest being like the $4 a month that you spend on Dropbox or whatever. And then see, of the top 3 to 5 expenses, those big ones at the top, if those make up 60 to 70% of your monthly cash flow, you probably have a boulders problem. If you have a really long trail of pebbles at the bottom, you might have a pebbles problem. And if your boulders are reasonable and you don't really have too many pebbles, you might have a water problem, if that makes sense. So, so I think doing that exercise just from a simple starting point really gives you the ability to solve the right problem instead of just being frustrated that things are what they are.
And I think being conscious of like, what are those pebbles that I do want to keep? I've gone through phases where my income, went way down. And so we did what you said, and we're, get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this. And then Spotify came up and I said, no, like I need Spotify to get me through the afternoon. It helps me just get my energy back up when I'm starting to feel tired or when I'm really stressed, or if the kids are cranky, we'll pump up some kid music. But it was like, it felt good to make that decision. Obviously that's a very small pebble, but it's nice to not have the guilt, going back to the guilt from earlier. Like, I don't feel guilty about that one. That is so helpful to just me getting through the day and enjoying the harder parts of the day, the witching hours. So yeah, I think it helps to identify that and then look at all the pebbles too, where we can go, you know what, we spend a bunch of money over here and like, I don't need that. That's an easy thing for me to take out. Let's just go ahead and take that out and feel good about that decision, realizing that I didn't really enjoy, going to that restaurant every week anyway.
Totally.
I love that.
Sally Krawcheck, who founded Ellevest, that's one of the companies that I consult for. And they're a financial brand focused on women. And, she talks about buy the effing latte, that it's just, sometimes that latte is what you need. And so nickel and diming your latte is really not what's going to help you make ultimate progress over time. And primarily older white men who have written financial books and are, speakers who talk about like, oh, well, you just need to cut out your coffee and make your coffee at home, make your lunch at home. That's not always the right solution, that's not, you're not going to make yourself a millionaire by just stopping and buying a latte. And that latte could do a lot more than $4 or $5 or whatever it is. If it gets you through the day, if it's something that fulfills you, or it's something that is really important to you, then just buy the effing latte, as Sally Krawcheck would say.
We'll put the bleeps up, okay, when I do the recording for this.
I won't say the real word, but that's, buy the, yes, that's her thing. So I think apropos.
But on the flip side of that too is, if you're spending that money every day just out of habit, if it's just this old habit that isn't even something that brings you joy anymore, cut it out, right? And find and keep those pebbles that do really get you through the day. I love that just the overall, message of this conversation is just notice what you're doing and why. Obviously at BigSpeak here, we're very passionate about habit formation and understanding why it's so hard and to make new habits and break old ones. But I mean, the first, and it seems like the biggest step, is just noticing, right? Noticing what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then go back and start doing this work.
Totally. Yeah. Alexa Von Tobel, who was a founder of one of the first startups that I worked for in the fintech space, she used to always talk about the cost per happy. And I think that's apropos as well, that like, if your cost per happy is really high to buy a $4 latte, then then buy it. And if your cost per happy is really high for the gym membership that might be a little more expensive than, you know, another gym membership in town, maybe it's worth it to stay with it. The idea is not just to cut. It's to find the things that bring you the most value, and, you know, say yes to the yeses and be willing to say no to the nos.
Right. Okay, before we move on, great question from Megan here. She's saying, what if it's a water problem? You know, single person with kids and need to figure out a way to get more water going down the stream. What's your advice there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think really being thoughtful about in the career path that you're in, is there a level at which you will be, like, is there a level that you can get to that will be enough water for your stream? You know, I don't mean to be so blunt, but like, how much does your boss make? And are you at a place where you could accelerate to that level within the next couple of years? Because I think until you look intentionally at like, what career path am I on and am I ever going to get there? If the answer is within sight, within the career path that you're in, then I think figuring out how to be really intentional about asking for a raise, especially for women, being able to understand like, what does success look like in my role if you don't have clear goals, and checking in with your boss about that, and setting yourself up for success to be able to make more in your career path, I think is really important. In terms of side income or additional income, there are definitely opportunities there. A lot of us have skill sets that we can consult on the side, whether you're a writer or a designer or a marketer, there's consulting work available. And so I think, you know, being strategic about starting a side business, but as a single mom with kids, it's not like you have a lot of time on your hands. So I get that it's a challenging problem to solve. And I just want to recognize that as I give ideas to think about.
Thank you. Okay, one more Boulders question. If the Boulders are 60% of your income, you said you have a Boulder problem, but is that gross or net income?
Net income. So we're really talking about like, what's coming home, what is actually flowing through your stream every month. Maybe you make 15,000 gross, but you only bring in 9 or 10 of that. So we're talking about the net.
Okay.
Yeah.
And thank you, Vanessa. And I just thought of something else, and of course it came and went. So we'll have to come back if it comes back to me in a minute here.
Okay.
But if you had to generalize, what's one like main area that you find your audiences as well as your private clients are just not savvy in?
That's such a good question. And I'll say, like, honestly, it varies so much. Some clients, you know, and I work with and I speak to people who are, you know, successful in their careers. Some of them are doctors or attorneys or really well trained in whatever area they're in. But I think it's not surprising to find that people who are really smart, really intelligent, really good at what they do, regardless of what that is, that they have holes. So I would say instead of like one area that people are really missing, I think it's just super common for there to be holes, that someone might understand a lot about refinancing and debt and that kind of stuff. But on the investment side, that's sort of a gray area for them. Or someone might be really savvy with low cost, strategically diversified portfolios. They're really great at picking index funds and, you know, putting together a good portfolio that's appropriate for their goals. But when it comes to how much to have in savings or life insurance, you know, do I do term or perm or disability insurance, that there are holes. And I think that's just a result of, well, a lot of things, but among them that we don't learn this stuff in school still. So I think it's not uncommon for us to develop, you know, acumen in some areas, but really have holes in others. And it has nothing to do with intelligence or ability or any of that. It's just our experience. We only know what we've experienced and what we've sought after to learn.
Well, and like what you said at the beginning, a lot of people in your world, you know, are selling things that their clients may or may not need based on how they get paid. And so, you know, if we don't know what we don't know, and then we don't know if we can trust this person who's trying to sell me, you know, lifetime insurance, then we just go back to putting our head in the sand, right?
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, if you don't have a trusted advisor that's a fiduciary that you can trust not to sell you stuff, then who are you supposed to ask these questions to? You know, I will have clients who tell me, like, I want to work with you because I want to understand this stuff, and I need someone I can trust that will teach me this. And again, like for me, if it turns out that like they learn everything they need to know and they feel empowered and capable and confident to go off and manage their finances on their own, that's a win. That's a win for me. It's a win for them. And so I think finding that confidant, that planner that you can trust is really, really hard. And I wish that there was something better that we could do. And that's part of, for me, like my personal mission in my work, to have an impact, to help people build their financial education so that they can make really great decisions for themselves, and that we can break down a lot of that opaque, complex stuff and make things transparent, because this is information that everybody should own. It should not be concentrated in the heads of those who are, professionals selling products to people. This is stuff that everybody should know, that everybody should have the opportunity to know. Not that I expect them to know it now, but that everybody should have the opportunity to know.
Yeah. Okay, so that brings me to another question. Why don't we talk about our finances with our friends? I think for some of us, we have some family members maybe that we can talk about it with, but it's so inappropriate to talk about your income. And my 8-year-old will ask, Mom, why can't we ask other people how much they make? And I'm like, I don't know. I just know that we're not supposed to, So 2 questions, like, why don't we talk about it? Because we could learn from our peers, mistakes and things to do and things to not do. And also, with those of us who have kids, like what's appropriate at what age? So let's start with like society. Why does society not talk about this?
Oh, good question. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I would say among them are that we have a lot of other thoughts, feelings, and beliefs inside money. And so when we talk about money, we're revealing those other things about ourselves, and that's what's so uncomfortable. A lot of us have success failure as a paradigm that's related to money. If I make more, I'm more successful. If I make less, I'm less successful. And our parents, in many cases, don't, they support that as well. It's like, oh, my daughter is doing so well, or my son is doing so well. He's a blah, blah, blah at blah, blah company. There's so much success failure in money, which I will say, like, even personally, when I had my first kiddo and had a career transition at that time from private practice into fintech, it was identity shattering to go from making what I was making before to entering fintech and making a different amount. And thankfully, it was less identity shattering the second time I did it, to leave the corporate world and go out on my own a couple of years ago. But we have a lot of identity, a lot of success failure, and a lot of other feelings and thoughts and beliefs inside money. And I think that's why it makes it hard to talk about, because there's so much under it that we don't know. We don't have effective language to deal with for ourselves or to talk to other people about.
And what's that statistic that, like, with your closest friends, your income is about like within 20% of each other anyway? Which is so funny. We don't talk about it, but we're all kind of in the same boat. And yeah, I think obviously hiring someone like you is a great decision, but just having people in your life who you can trust and kind of be vulnerable with and say, hey, we don't know what to do here. What have you guys done, or what's your advice?
Totally.
Would be so great. Okay, so now to kids then. Like, how much do you share with your kids, and what's appropriate? And do you worry that they're going to go to the playground and tell everybody else what you guys are doing?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there isn't one answer for everybody. So it's not like everybody should tell their kids exactly what they make. But I do think, from what I generally see, that more openness is needed. I think it's okay for your kids to know, they need to understand, like, I make a set amount of income. I'm on salary, so I can't make any more or less. And so we have to do the best with the amount that we have. Or I'm a business owner. And so, depending on the projects that I'm taking or the clients that I'm working with, my income changes. And here, I think there's a lot we can teach our kids about money without necessarily giving them the numbers. And I think it's important to help them understand not only habits with money. I feel like there's a lot of like give, save, spend jars and stuff like that, which are great habits for kids to understand. But I think if you can help your kids really understand how to think about money and how to talk about money, to say, oh, you know what, I would love to buy that. I'm thinking that I'd rather spend our money in this other way. And I don't, we don't have enough room for both this month. But I think I'd love to do this thing because that, family time together is so important to us. I think helping them just see and letting it be an open conversation. I always say, like, my little one is obsessed with football, but I don't have to be an expert on every quarterback to be able to talk football with my 5-year-old, because he knows more than I do. But like, we can still talk football. It can still be a part of everyday conversation. They need to understand that things cost money. And I think there's some other skills, like I always say, help your kids build advertising immunity. So
that's a good one.
Kids see advertising everywhere, like video games and TV and all these places. And it's so insidious because in social media, like, it's so much more difficult to actually recognize. Before, it was like you could clearly tell when there was a commercial on TV. Now there's like product placement and magazines. It's very difficult to tell. Am I reading an article or an ad? Because they make it look like an article. So helping kids understand, like, this is an advertisement that's made by somebody who wants you to go buy something, and you have to decide whether you buy into that or not. And just that recognition to help them build advertising immunity. I think there are a lot of really cool skills that we can help our kids with that are beyond, answering the questions of what to make and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to ask about COVID, but also this is a really great question about someone wanting to get ready to go out on their own. Thank you, Carla, for that. So maybe like all in one, has COVID caused you to give your clients certain advice about their emergency fund, and, or, if you are going to prepare to leave the corporate world, what's a great way to financially get ready to make that move?
Yeah. So, and I just looked at the time. We only have a few minutes
left. I know.
Going fast. So in terms of COVID, building emergency fund is definitely important if it's not already fully stocked. It just gives you so much flexibility, and building an emergency fund is one of the most effective ways that you can reduce financial stress. So having an emergency fund in a high yield savings account is critical.
Meaning just high interest, right?
High interest, yeah. So banks like Capital One or Ally Bank, usually online banks, they offer high yield savings accounts. The yields aren't great right now because interest rates are so low, but it's worthwhile to use one, because your regular bank, your brick and mortar, Chase and Wells Fargo, they'll pay you 0.01%, which is like nothing. So, so yeah, having a fully stocked emergency fund right now is really important. For those who have a mortgage, interest rates are hitting all-time lows again. You can get a 30-year mortgage under 3%. I just had a client refinance at 2.5% on a 30-year loan. So there are opportunities to refinance. If you've been in your loan for quite a while, like you're many years in, it may not make sense to refinance because you've already made so much progress. I would say
starting that 30-year clock over again.
Exactly. So I would say talk to a mortgage broker, or if you have a trusted financial planner, talk to them and they can help you determine whether it's a good thing to do. But those are some of the more timely opportunities that I'm talking with clients about. And then in terms of preparing to go out on your own, liquidity, like cash is king. Being able to have the flexibility to know that, like, you can invest, that your expenses are covered. And so there's a little bit less pressure on your business to have to provide and to have to be profitable super soon. And so that you can have a little bit of money to be able to invest in the things that you need to help you make your business successful, whether it's $400 to a designer to help design some templates and deliverables for you, or somebody, to do a basic website for you for $1,000. I think having some cash to be able to not have so much pressure to cover living expenses and to be able to invest a little bit in your business and get you up and running is really, really critical.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Like you said, interest rates are super low right now. So that means we're not earning a lot of interest on our emergency fund money sitting there. But what's the flip side of that? Like, aside from refinancing your home, how else can we take advantage of that? Because the Fed just announced that they're going to keep them near zero until at least 2023, right?
Yeah. So that was a big change in policy, kind of like a nerdy, like push up my glasses sort of change on how the Fed manages to their 2% kind of KPI, I guess. But anyway, so other things, any debt that you have, especially mortgages. I mean, mortgages are the biggest one, but there are refinance opportunities. So, and student loans, if you have federal student loans, those payments are on hold through the end of the year, which is great. but you still get credit towards any loan forgiveness programs that you're eligible for, with some caveats. But yeah, so I think refinancing debt, like if you have an auto loan at a higher interest rate and you have a high credit score, there's a chance to refinance an auto loan at a lower rate. But those are generally the spots I would say to go to.
Great. Okay, what's your final word to all of us here at BigSpeak, and how can our clients find you? People are asking where your book is, when your book's going to be available. So give us one final thought to leave us with, and then tell us how we can find you.
Yeah, I would say my final thought is just that finances don't have to be as complex and opaque and difficult and stressful as a lot of people in my industry want them to be. I think there's a lot of opportunity in thinking about your finances differently in a fresh way that's values-based, and kind of frees you from some of those boxes that you might be in financially. And then in terms of where to find me, you can go to my website. It's natalieanntaylor.com. Everything is spelled the boring way. So NATALIEANNTAYLOR.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. And I'll have some courses up on LinkedIn Learning soon as well, which will be fun.
Yes. Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's all about growth and change, positive change. And I think this area of life is such an important one to continue our growth and how we think about our work and our life and wanting to enjoy the process along the way. So I think you've been a great addition to this series. And thanks to everyone who joined. Be on the lookout for future programs, and call BigSpeak if you want to hire Natalie for a corporate event. And call Natalie if you want to talk to her about private consultation. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.